Today we're talking about shadow work. Shadow work, which I also call soul work, is a very deep and transformative healing process. Our emotional wounds are brought to the surface and are made conscious so that we can heal them during this process. Today, I'm sharing a very general overview. I want to share some of the foundational information about shadow work. I'll explain my personal methods and show simple steps on how to start to practice. I'll also talk about what shadow work entails, explain the shadow self is, and also what the benefits are for doing shadow work. I want to also talk about who might be ready for this very deep and transformative process, and also how to know if you are ready. And I'm making this statement because not everyone is ready for this very powerful healing technique. At the very end, I will share my step by step process for practicing shadow work. Allow me to introduce myself. Welcome to Starwell Astrology. My name is Sharrie, and I am a Western tropical astrologer, but I specialize in shadow work. And I do offer personal one on one natal chart readings and also one on one shadow work coaching. My information is below. Now, I have a really special offer coming up. I'm offering free shadow work workshops every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're interested and would like to join us, just send me an email and I will give you the details on how to join. I plan to do this on a weekly basis on a Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I would love to see you there. What we will practice during those workshops is what I'm talking about in this video, and this will give you a very good idea of whether or not this is something that you would be interested in practicing. So shadow work is my first love. I know most might think astrology is, but shadow work trumps astrology. And I'll tell you why, because astrology is great for preparing us for what's ahead, but shadow work is a real method that can empower us and help us to deal with our life challenges in general. It is one of the most transformative methods for healing when done accurately. The reason I'm saying this is that if done accurately, this method should allow us to grow and face our emotional wounds instead of leaving us feeling stuck in them. At the very least, if we still feel stuck in our wounds, be able to become aware of them and notice our triggers so that we're not reacting unconsciously to them and therefore unknowingly recreating more of the same wounded patterns. However, there must be a real commitment to follow through and release our painful wounds. Otherwise, we will not get the results of processing, transmuting, and integrating the wounded shadow self fully. There are many reasons that we cling to or get stuck in our wounded self, even when it's painful. And the main reason, of course, is because the roots of these unprocessed and unhealed wounds are either unconscious or even if they are conscious emotional wounds, they are part of an automatic and conditioned behavior pattern. In other words, we feel very identified with our wounded self. We might resist going deeper into exploring our shadow side when our wounds are tied to core beliefs. And because of this deep connection, our very existence as a conditioned personality is tied to the ideas we believe about ourselves. I know this is very deep, but it's the truth of the of shadow work. And when you and if you really practice shadow work at the depth I'm speaking of, this becomes very obvious to you. So these unprocessed wounds called the shadow self are an unintegrated part of our identity or our personality. And even more painful realization is that we're addicted to our wounds, mostly because they're so familiar. Getting to those root causes will take a real commitment and also the courage to be honest and open with ourselves so that we can explore and excavate the shadow aspects of the self. I will not go deeper into these reasons because I said today is just an overview of what shadow work is about. I will explain this very briefly, but of course, here I am oversimplifying something that is a very deep and complex topic. So, to understand what the shadow self is, we need to know how this exists as an unconscious part of our personality. In my opinion, on how I can explain this, we operate through three main aspects as a self or a soul. The three aspects of the self are the pure soul, the conditioned personality, and the shadow self. Now, the first aspect, which is our pure soul, is also the I am presence. When we're born as an infant, we are naturally in this state. We're innocent and we're not identified with a personality. This aspect of the self is what I call many things. It's the pure soul, it's the I am presence, which is the true self, because it's the purest state of the ego, and it's also our authentic self. In our infantile stage, we're closest to who we are at our core essence or true nature. Now, the second aspect of the self gets developed as we get older. Once we start to identify with a name and we learn language, ways to communicate, and we realize that we belong to a certain family, a culture, or we realize what our race is and our gender is, and so forth, we get groomed into becoming a conditioned personality. I refer to this as the ego identity also, or the conditioned personality. And but this is really our mask, the mask that we wear in the world, since it's really a false sense of self that we are conditioned to exist through as a personality. Our pure soul gets shaped into becoming a personality based on certain conditions and expectations. Keep in mind that the aspect of the self or the ego that we are identified with and are constantly trying to reshape or redefine is the personality. I want to say this one more time because it's very important to understand this foundation for shadow work. Immediately after we're born, the pure ego gets groomed into identifications, comes through conditioned beliefs. Because of this, as we get older, we lose sight of our pure essence as a soul and are shaped into becoming a conditioned personality. The conditioned personality gets defined by core beliefs. Now, the third aspect of the self is the shadow self. It is the unconscious, hidden side of us that stores wounded impressions in our memory. Traumatic experiences that are unprocessed and unhealed becomes an emotional wound that we hold on to both consciously and unconsciously. We experience our daily lives through the conditioned personality or the ego identity. But our shadow side is operating on an unconscious level, behind the scenes, in the background, automatically affecting how we react to life through our choices. So let's talk about what shadow work really is about, how to practice this method of healing. Before I get there, let's first get a brief background on the origins of the practice of shadow work. Shadow work is a healing technique coined by the well-known psychiatrist Carl Jung. However, the term shadow work has been redefined over many years. Now it has become a modern day self-help tool that we can use to heal ourselves. To be honest, I have not studied the exact methods of Jungian psychology, but I do know my healing methods are very similar to what is traditionally called shadow work. My methods of shadow work is pretty much the same, but with the added dimension of soul work. I won't explain completely what soul work is today because it is more of a spiritual practice. But soul work offers a deeper understanding of shadow work, and it's the reason I am mentioning it. Soul work is an important part of my work because it is what gives us a real foundation for shadow work to continue to be effective in all our life experiences. There are many levels to this healing journey, and soul work is the deepest. but we must start somewhere. So it's best to start by looking at our shadow side. And now that we understand what the shadow self is, we now know it's part of us that is unconscious, therefore hidden. The shadow self holds our secrets, our addictions, our self sabotaging behavior, and our self undoing behavior. It's the part of us that we want to deny, reject, or ignore, but also it's the part of us that is unconscious. And so we are not really all that aware of how much impact it has on us. There are at least two ways the shadow self stays active. One way is through the obvious and conscious emotional triggers that we feel. And the other is the unconscious emotional triggers that we're not aware of. When we start out practicing shadow work, we focus on the emotional triggers that we are conscious of and allow the process to unfold and reveal itself naturally. Eventually, the deeper layers of emotional wounding that are unconscious will become more pronounced. But of course, this depends on how willing we are to do the work to go deeper. Remember, shadow work entails facing uncomfortable feelings such as shame, guilt, fear, jealousy, rage, our vindictive behavior. So it's not easy to acknowledge this in ourselves. So it does take a certain readiness to be prepared to face this side of ourselves. But here are the most important steps we can take to practice shadow work. The very first thing we need to practice is witnessing ourselves through higher awareness. I call this the self witnessing practice because it allows us to become more objective. Therefore, we become more present and aware of our actions, our thoughts, our behavior, our choices, what we're feeling. This is so that we might notice our emotional triggers. Another important practice is taking accountability. And I must say, this is the most difficult part of practicing shadow work, especially if we have a very strong attachment to our ego's personality. It is likely that you will not get the benefits of shadow work if you are not able to remove this mask. For progress to happen on our healing journey through the self-witnessing practice, we must take accountability for what we're feeling, and I call this the emotional truth. To take accountability for what we are feeling and then to acknowledge what we're feeling is the next step. Then we must face what we're feeling by allowing it to be there. Our feelings cannot be integrated for healing unless we are willing to first acknowledge that they exist and face them and allow them to be exposed as our emotional truth. So, who might benefit from doing shadow work? Shadow work is for those who want to explore themselves and get to know the truth of who they are. That is a very loaded statement, but if you are ready to do shadow work, then it might resonate in a way that you just know what I'm saying. I will explain that statement at a later time. Also, those who feel called at a soul level might be ready for shadow work because shadow work becomes soul work as we deepen into becoming more emotionally mature. The awareness transforms us through an inner refinement called alchemy. But for most of us, we just want to feel better about ourselves and our lives, and that's fine. Shadow work is one of the most powerful and transformative healing tools for our everyday life. So the most common reasons for doing shadow work happens when we get tired of repeating painful old patterns. And we start to see that there's something that we're doing that's causing us to recreate or re-injure wounds. And once we get tired enough and we start to do the work to heal, if we're doing methods that's not necessarily working or getting to that deep level that we need, then we might consider shadow work. It's not something that we're naturally drawn to because we are looking at our shadows and no one wants to look at that. So It usually takes going through traditional healing methods, then seeing that we're not getting deep enough or going deep enough, or finding that what we've done is only working temporarily or it hasn't delivered the level of healing we expect. So that this is when shadow work might become a useful tool for you. Or others who might benefit from doing shadow work, I will say everyone, but like I said, it's a certain amount of readiness that we need to have when we're doing shadow work. If things are good and life is happy, we don't care about shadow work. But when things get too painful, that's when we're ready. There must be enough desire to stay open, curious, and with an inquiring mind, and also be willing to learn something that might be different from everything that we already believe about ourselves. Because what we're doing when we get deep enough is breaking through conditioned patterns. And this is linked to our personality. So as we start to shatter these patterns, we realize that a lot of what we believe about ourselves comes from conditioned patterns. And these patterns are linked to core beliefs. And these core beliefs are tied to emotional wounds. So as we get deeper and deeper into the process, we start to see this. So these realizations come with continuing to do the shadow work practice that will eventually soften up the conditioned personality to allow the true self or the authentic core essence of who we are to become integrated into being a part of our everyday life. Now, this is an important statement because who we are as the true self, our core essence, is overshadowed by the conditioned personality, the mask that we are expected to wear out in the world. And even though this is accepted, and 99.9% of our world is living this way, there's a true part of us that is not getting any attention. And once we start to do the shadow work, the personality begins to dissolve, soften up, so that it becomes integrated with our core essence. And so when we start to make choices in our day-to-day lives, they come from a more authentic and self-empowered part of us that is aligned in our inner authority. So, an important disclaimer, with shadow work, we get the results based on our willingness to do the inner work. This work gives you back what you are willing to put in. If you don't do the work, if you are guarded, if you're closed, if you feel suspicious, if you're feeling very protective of what you're feeling, then, especially if you're unable to take accountability, then this work will be very limited. The results will be very limited. Also, it requires facing our fears, having the courage to stay open enough to see what it is that needs healing. In order to get the results from shadow work, this is essential. Shadow work requires also that we remain in a surrendered state of staying open and forgiving of ourselves and everyone else. And that's a huge ask, but that's part of the work. Also, we must be able to see our own judgments. And we have judgments of everything, including ourselves, all the time. And we have to be able to call ourselves out on that to see how it is that we're operating through those core beliefs that cause us to judge others. I have said this again and again that shadow work is not for everyone, but for those who are truly ready, it is one of the most powerful and profound transformative healing tools that we have available to us. So why does healing matter? And why don't we just forget about this whole thing since it's so difficult? And what are the benefits of shadow work? I've already mentioned many of them, but we will still talk about it one more time because the truth is that no one wants to suffer and no one wants to feel disempowered. And we would like to stand in our authentic self and own our inner authority so that we're living a life that is aligned in what is true and truly who we are. When we're not, we are constantly suffering because we tend to repeat a lot of our same wounded patterns over and over again. The difference with shadow work is that we become aware of them, and then we have the option to make a higher choice. The truth is that as humans, we must face challenges, and we can't completely avoid having difficulties in our lives because part of the reason we're here is to live through those difficult situations and to learn and grow through challenging situations. But with conscious effort, if we apply shadow work, we can move through most of these challenging situations and get to the other side of ourselves transformed into a higher state of awareness. Our wounding can be fully healed and fully integrated with the conscious effort of doing shadow work. With shadow work, we learn to become more empowered in our lives. We get to own all parts of ourselves, even our wounds that we once denied. When healed, they are integrated and therefore no longer have the power to cause us to make self destructive choices. What is the healing technique for shadow work? I'm going to repeat them again step by step so that it's clear. The first and the most important technique to practice is self-witnessing. What is self-witnessing? Simply being aware and present to what you are thinking and feeling in your day-to-day life. It takes no extra time to do this. You just need to set the intention to become self-aware. And once you remember, do it. Just stay aware. And if you forget, you can still go back, to an earlier part of the day or maybe even a half hour before and notice, see if you can remember what you were thinking and what you were feeling and what you were doing and what your behavior was like. That can be done. However, as you continue to do the practice, you'll become more and more aware even in the moment, which is an even more profound way of practicing the self-witnessing. So the second step is then once you have become aware of what you're feeling, is to acknowledge the feeling. If you're frustrated, claim your frustration, because to claim what you feel as your own is to know that what you feel belongs to you and no one else. I'm frustrated. It's my frustration. This is important because otherwise we project it. If our kids are around, we take out our frustration on the kids or our spouses or good friend or whatever. And just becoming aware that we are irritated and claiming that irritation makes it clear to us that the irritation belongs to us and us alone. Then we face or confront what we feel, and this is the work to fully feel the irritation, the anger, the shame, the frustration, the guilt, or the fear. There's so many unpleasant things that we don't want to feel. So once we feel them, we must face them so that they can be fully experienced. Otherwise, they tend to get projected. So we tend to automatically deflect our unpleasant feelings through blame. And yes, we blame others mostly, but we also blame ourselves. So the thing is that once we're aware of what we're feeling and we stay present to that feeling, we're not allowing it to go somewhere else. It's staying with us. It's a conditioned belief to believe that what we feel or what is unpleasant needs to go somewhere because we don't want to own it. But when we start to own it, it becomes ours, not something else and not someone else's. It's ours. And this happens without us putting any real blame on ourselves because remember, we're staying open, we're staying surrendered, we're forgiving ourselves, We're just being present to what we feel. So once we stay present to what we feel, we get to the other side of the feeling. And this is such an interesting process, because once you allow your irritation to be felt, it softens, it dissolves, it transforms. And that transformation at a very, very infantile stage is really transforming you, your energetic signature, to something higher, rather than it's taking you down lower. Because remember, everything is energy, but that's another topic. Just thought I would mention that. So the fourth thing is, once we feel that that irritation, and I've kind of said this already, is we're taking accountability, because we're allowing the feeling to be ours, and we realize that it doesn't belong to someone else. It's our own irritation, pain, fear, shame, guilt, whatever it is, it's ours. And we make this clear that it's part of what we are experiencing right now. And again, I already said this, but we stay open, we stay surrendered, we forgive ourselves, we allow things to be as it is. To leave things as it is difficult for our minds, because our minds want to go back and pick at it. But to just notice that your mind want to go back and pick at the feeling. But awareness of this also allows the mind and the repetitive thought process that wants to go back to the feeling and ignite the situation, that can be witnessed. But that comes with practice. Just start here. And it's also important that for shadow work to truly have an impact on our healing journey, it must become a direct experience. So the fact that I listed all these things, if you just write down this list and you just say, oh, that sounds interesting, I'm going to do it, but you don't actually do the practice, then this is just information. Because what I'm saying to you needs to become your direct experience. That's the only way shadow work can work. So I'm strongly suggesting that you do the shadow work practice. Try it for a week. See what happens. Notice what I'm saying. Then it becomes your direct experience. And when that becomes your direct experience, this is not information that I'm asking you to believe. It becomes your direct knowing. So you get to see shadow work being actively practiced in your own self, through your own self. And you will see what I'm saying about how these feelings, how we tend to project them. And once we take accountability and allow ourselves to feel them fully, how they dissolve. I hope that you'll consider doing this practice. And I am really hoping that I will hear from some of you, those of you who are really interested in doing this shadow work, to consider joining me at my free workshop every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can contact me through my email at starwellastro@gmail.com, and I will give you the information on how to join. Don't forget that I do offer natal chart readings, and I do offer one-on-one shadow work coaching. I really hope to see you there. Thank you. Goodbye.